Imagine printing a small, poorly photocopied pamphlet about a fast food chain, and suddenly you are trapped in the longest civil trial in English history against a multi-billion-dollar corporation. Here is the true story of the McLibel case. This is the story of how a $30 billion corporation decided to sue a postman and a gardener over a leaflet and somehow turned it into the longest trial in English history, the worst corporate PR disaster of its time, and a case that literally changed British law. It's called the McLibel case, and it is absolutely wild. Let's go back to 1986. In London, there's a small environmental group called London Greenpeace. Not the big Greenpeace you're thinking of. This is a tiny, scrappy, volunteer-run outfit that actually predates the famous organization and refused to join them because they thought Greenpeace International was too centralized and mainstream. Already, you know these people were committed. So this little group puts together a 6-page leaflet. The title? What's Wrong with McDonald's? Everything they don't want you to know. They printed a few hundred copies and handed them out on the Strand in London. The leaflet accused McDonald's of paying low wages, being cruel to animals, damaging the environment, and a handful of other corporate sins. Standard activist stuff, a few hundred copies. Not exactly front-page news. But here's the thing about McDonald's in the late 80s and early 90s. They were aggressively litigious. Before this case, they had threatened to sue more than 50 organizations for libel, including Channel 4 television and several major publications. And every single time the target backed down, apologized, and moved on with their lives. Every single time. So when McDonald's lawyers identified 5 members of London Greenpeace as responsible for the leaflet, they expected the same result. In September 1990, they issued libel writs against all 5. 3 of the defendants, Paul Gravitt, Andrew Clark, and Jonathan O'Farrell, did exactly what McDonald's expected. They apologized. But Helen Steele and David Morris did not. Helen Steele was a gardener. Dave Morris was an unemployed single father and former postman. Between them, they earned about $12,000 a year. McDonald's, for context, was worth approximately $30 billion. And because of how British law works, Steele and Morris were denied legal aid. They would have to represent themselves in court against one of the largest corporations on earth. This is where things start to get interesting, because McDonald's didn't just send lawyers after London Greenpeace. Starting in October 1989, a full year before the writs were even filed, McDonald's sent undercover private investigators to infiltrate the group. These spies attended meetings, took minutes, answered letters, made friends with members, and followed people home to find out where they lived. They even stole the group's mail, and the infiltration wasn't subtle. At multiple meetings, there were as many corporate spies in the room as there were actual activists. On at least 2 separate occasions, half the people at the table were working for McDonald's. It's almost comedic. These investigators were also receiving information from the Metropolitan Police, which would later become its own scandal. But the real bombshell wouldn't drop until 2013. That's when the world learned that one of the people who helped write the leaflet, the very document McDonald's sued over, was an undercover police officer named Bob Lambert. Lambert had been planted in London Greenpeace by the Metropolitan Police's Special Demonstration Squad. He posed as a left-wing animal rights activist from 1983 to 1988, and during that time, he co-authored the McLibel leaflet. A friend later told The Guardian that the leaflet was like his baby and that Lambert carried it around with him. So let me make sure you're following this. A police officer infiltrated an activist group, helped write a leaflet, and then the corporation sued the activists for distributing it. You cannot make this up. And the police infiltration didn't stop with Lambert. Another undercover officer named John Dines also spied on the group. Dines started a romantic relationship with Helen Steele under a fake identity. They lived together for 2 years. She had no idea who he really was. When he eventually disappeared, it caused her enormous psychological distress. Oh, and Dines also spied on the pair's young pro bono lawyer, a newly qualified barrister named Keir Starmer. You might recognize that name. He's currently the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. Starmer worked on the McLibel case for free for 10 years. Helen Steele later said he was great back then. He helped us for free for a very, very long time. He was giving us advice behind the scenes, drafting pleadings for us, stuff like that. So the current Prime Minister's confidential legal strategy was being monitored by undercover police the entire time. That's being investigated right now in the ongoing undercover policing inquiry. Now, the trial itself. It began on June 28, 1994, in Court 35 of the High Court. It was the first libel case ever handled by the presiding judge, Mr. Justice Roger Bell, and it just kept going. By March 1995, it was the longest libel trial in British history. By December 1995, it was the longest civil case. By November 1996, it officially became the longest trial of any kind in English legal history. Conservative pundit Oberon Waugh called it the best free entertainment in London. On June 19, 1997, Justice Bell finally delivered his verdict. It was over 1,000 pages long, summarized by a 45-page document read aloud in court. The ruling was technically in McDonald's favor. They were awarded £60,000 in damages, later reduced to $40,000 on appeal. But the actual findings were devastating for McDonald's. The judge ruled that McDonald's exploits children with misleading advertising, was culpably responsible for unnecessary cruelty to animals, was antipathetic to unionization, and paid low wages. The appeal court later added that it was fair to say McDonald's employees worldwide do badly in terms of pay and conditions, and that eating enough McDonald's food creates the very real risk of heart disease. McDonald's announced it wouldn't collect the £40,000. Smart move, since Steele and Morris couldn't have paid it anyway. But the case wasn't over. In 2000, Steele and Morris took their fight to the European Court of Human Rights, arguing that being denied legal aid in such a complex case violated their fundamental rights. On February 15, 2005, the court agreed, ruling that the UK had breached both the right to a fair trial and the right to freedom of expression. The UK government was ordered to pay Steele and Morris £57,000 in compensation. The aftermath reshaped British law. The Defamation Act 2013 was enacted partly in response to the McLibel case, raising the bar for libel claims and making it harder for corporations to bully critics through the courts. As for the leaflet, before the lawsuit, a few hundred copies existed. By the end, over 2 million had been distributed in the UK alone. A documentary about the case reached an estimated 25 million viewers. The case became a textbook example of what we now call the Streisand effect, trying to suppress information and instead amplifying it beyond your worst nightmare. David Panic QC, writing in The Times, said the case achieved what many lawyers thought impossible: to lower further the reputation of our law of defamation in the minds of all right-thinking people. McDonald's sued two people who had almost nothing and somehow ended up with less than they started with. A postman and a gardener took on a global empire, represented themselves in court for 313 days, and walked out the other side having changed the law, exposed corporate espionage, and turned a 6-page leaflet into one of the most famous documents in British legal history. All because McDonald's thought everyone would just apologize.